What if the stability you believed would protect your future is actually an illusion slipping through your fingers? And what if the world you assumed was becoming safer is quietly drifting toward a moment that could rewrite every idea we have about global power, national security, and the terrifying fragility of peace? Because today, as adults who've lived through recessions, layoffs, wars, and political turmoil, we all try to convince ourselves that at least one thing is predictable, that nuclear peace is stable. But what happens when the world's largest nuclear arsenal suddenly declares that the nuclear threat will grow simply because the United States rejected its proposal on arms control? And the real question haunting every serious adult mind is this just political pressure? Or is the world slowly sliding toward a moment where even superpowers can stop what's coming next? As Russia warns the US that dismissing Moscow's arms control offer will push the world into greater nuclear danger, the entire architecture of global stability begins to shake. Because when two nations holding 90% of the world's nuclear weapons reach a point of distrust this deep, nothing about tomorrow can be assumed safe. Russia's message wasn't vague, wasn't diplomatic, and wasn't softened for international comfort. It was a direct statement, to almost a threat, declaring that the nuclear risks will increase if the US continues to reject arms control dialogue. This isn't a small negotiation breakdown. This is not just another disagreement between two rivals. This is the exact kind of fracture that historically pushes nations into arms races, silent escalations, and psychological standoffs that creep under people's skin. Adults who grew up hearing about fallout shelters, radio warnings, and Cold War drills know exactly how heavy such words can be. And those who didn't are about to understand. Because when Russia, with its massive nuclear triad land, air, sea, starts signaling that it will expand its capabilities unless the US comes to the table, the question becomes, is this a negotiation strategy? Or a warning of a future none of us are emotionally prepared to witness? The core issue is simple. Russia wants Washington to agree to new arms control talks, but the US believes Moscow in actually acting in good faith, pointing to conflicts, treaties broken in the past, and aggressive modernization efforts already underway. From Washington's perspective, sitting down with Russia without trust is like negotiating peace with someone holding a loaded weapon behind their back. And from Russia's perspective, the US refusing to negotiate is proof that Washington wants strategic dominance. This clash of perceptions is what makes the situation deadly. Because in the nuclear world, miscommunication matters as much as missiles. Doubt matters as much as armies. One misunderstood signal can trigger spirals that history has repeatedly shown end in catastrophe. While Russia insists that its warning is simply a cause and effect reality, experts see something darker, a subtle attempt to shift blame. If a new nuclear arms race begins, Russia wants the world to believe the US caused it by rejecting diplomacy. But America sees it differently. The US believes Russia wants negotiations only to freeze American advantages while expanding its own. So both sides think they're preventing danger, while both actually push the danger forward. And this is where adult insecurities kick in, because nothing is more terrifying for a working-class adult, a parent, a homeowner, a student buried under responsibilities, than the idea that global powers are gambling with nuclear stability while ordinary people have no control over the outcome. Your routines, your plans, your future, they all rely on a world where leaders don't make catastrophic mistakes. But the truth is, that world might be disappearing. When Russia says the nuclear threat will grow, it means several things simultaneously. It means more warheads added to active deployment. It means faster launch systems. It means increased submarine patrols. It means development of hypersonic delivery weapons that no missile shield on Earth can currently stop. It means more military exercises near NATO borders. And worst of all, it means the psychological climate that once kept nuclear powers cautious is fading, replaced by a dangerous confidence that each side believes it can outmatch the other. Adults who've lived long enough know one harsh truth. Whenever confidence replaces caution in global politics, disaster follows. What makes this crisis even more unsettling is how eerily familiar it feels. The Cold War's shadow is back, but this time the world is more fragile, more polarized, more unpredictable. Back then, the fear itself kept leaders careful. Today, leaders talk about nuclear weapons as if they're bargaining chips, not civilization-ending tools. And that casual tone is what sends a chill through the spine of anyone paying attention. Because when superpowers stop respecting the danger grows. The US has reasons for refusing Russia's proposal. Washington believes Moscow won't follow the terms anyway, given its history of treaty violations like the INF Treaty collapse. But Russia counters by saying the US also walked away from agreements when it suited them. So both sides stand on a mountain of grievances, and both believe they're right. But here's the thing about nuclear rivalry. It doesn't matter who's right. It matters who miscalculates first. And miscalculation is exactly what the world is terrified of right now. NATO intelligence already reports increasing nuclear rhetoric in Russian state media. US defense analysts warn that Moscow be accelerating its development of tactical nuclear systems designed for battlefield use. European nations express growing concern that political disagreements are turning into strategic threats. But the average adult watching the news feels something even more personal, an unspoken fear that the world is becoming too unstable, too fast. We're living in a time where headlines change in seconds, alliances shift without warning, and crises escalate long before anyone can process them. And now, with nuclear warnings entering the conversation, global anxiety has reached a level society hasn't felt since the late 20th century. So the question now is this Russian warning a negotiation tactic? Or the beginning of a new era where nuclear threats become a normal part of international communication? And if the US keeps rejecting Moscow's proposal, are we heading toward a future shaped by pressure, arms races, and silent countdowns? Because if both powers keep pushing forward without talking, one day we may all wake up to a world where peace isn't something we lost suddenly, but something that slipped away gradually, while everyone assumed it was safe. But before we dive deeper, ask yourself one unsettling question. What if the nuclear dangers we worry about today are indeed the ones that will actually threaten us tomorrow? What if the real danger is the silent breakdown of diplomatic trust, the kind that grows so slowly that by the time anyone notices, it's already too late? Because right now, Russia and the United States aren't just disagreeing over an arms control proposal. They're drifting into a psychological battlefield where every signal is interpreted as aggression, every hesitation is seen as weakness, and every warning, no matter how loud, feels like a step closer to a future adults fear more than anything, a world where nuclear escalation becomes normal. Russia's declaration that the nuclear threat will grow isn't just a headline, it's a symptom of a deeper sickness between the world's biggest nuclear superpowers. And when their relationship breaks down, the entire global security structure begins to tremble. At the core of this crisis is something adults understand too well. When communication stops, relationships fall apart. Whether it's marriages, friendships, or nations armed with thousands of warheads, it's the same rule. And right now, Russia and the US aren't communicating. They're accusing, posturing, and pushing the boundaries of escalation. Washington says Moscow can't be trusted. Moscow says Washington is the one refusing stability. Both sides claim they want peace, but neither wants to make the first move. And that stalemate creates the most dangerous kind of tension, silent tension. Because silence breeds fear, fear breeds suspicion, and suspicion breeds hostile actions that no one planned but everyone regrets. Consider Russia's mindset. After years of geopolitical pressure, sanctions, and military tension with NATO, Moscow views arms control not as goodwill, but as a necessity to maintain balance. To Russia, a world where the US grows stronger without limits is a world where Moscow's national security is at risk. So, when the US rejects their proposal, Russia interprets it as America trying to push them into a dangerous corner. And when a superpower feels cornered, it doesn't shrink, it sharpens its claws. That's why Russia warns that rejecting dialogue will increase nuclear danger. It's not just a phrase. It's a reaction born out of strategic fear. But let's flip the perspective. Washington sees Russia's offer as a trap. The US views Russian diplomacy as a tactic. Negotiate to freeze American power, while Russia secretly expands its own capabilities. After all, treaties in the past have been violated or abandoned when convenient. So, if the US sits at the table now, Washington fears it might be giving Russia more time to modernize, experiment, and reposition its nuclear forces. And that fear, deep, historical, psychological, is why the US hesitates. Adults who've lived through political manipulation understand this perfectly. When you believe someone only negotiates to buy time, you don't negotiate, you step back. Yet both sides stepping back at the same time creates a vacuum. And in global politics, a vacuum is the deadliest place to stand. Russia, sensing this vacuum, begins strengthening its nuclear posture, expanding submarine patrols in the Arctic, increasing missile tests, and emphasizing new strategic weapons like hypersonic glide vehicles that can bypass missile defenses. The US, responding to the shift, accelerates modernization of its own nuclear triad: new submarines, upgraded ICBMs, advanced stealth bombers. Europe watches both giants with growing unease, knowing that if a nuclear arms race ignites, the European continent is the likely fault line. And let's not forget a harsh truth: nuclear weapons today are more powerful, far more accurate, and far more unpredictable than those used during the Cold War. Back then, fear alone was enough to prevent disaster. Today, technology gives leaders dangerous confidence that their systems are smarter, faster, and safer. But adults who understand life know one thing better than any military strategist: technology fails, systems malfunction, human error creeps in. And when mistakes happen in the world of nuclear weapons, there are no second chances. What makes today's crisis uniquely terrifying is the absence of the old guard, the leaders, diplomats, and negotiators who lived through the Cold War and understood its costs. Back then, the fear of mutual destruction forced caution. But today's leaders are surrounded by new pressures, new ideologies, and new rivalries. They are more willing to take risks, more willing to push boundaries, more willing to gamble with global stability to gain psychological advantage. And when risk-taking becomes a political strategy, the world enters dangerous waters. Adults sense this intuitively. The feeling that the world is becoming less stable is not paranoia, it's recognition. Recognition that global powers are drifting toward escalation with too many unknowns, too many grievances, and a few safeguards. When Russia says the nuclear threat will grow, it's not just warning the US, it's warning the world that the era of predictable peace is fading. But here's where the fear deepens. What happens if neither side blinks? What if the US continues to reject Russia's proposal? What if Moscow responds by deploying more tactical nuclear weapons near NATO borders, or increasing military operations in contested regions? What if the next crisis, whether in Europe, the Arctic, or the Pacific, occurs without communication channels strong enough to prevent misinterpretation? Because in nuclear strategy, misinterpretation is deadlier than any missile. Imagine this: a radar glitch during a military drill. A satellite misreads a heat signature. A submarine loses contact for a few hours. A spy plane flies too close to a border. A missile test is mistaken for a real launch. These things have happened before. We survived only because back then, leaders were terrified of nuclear war and double-checked everything. But today, with mistrust skyrocketing, a glitch could be interpreted as an attack, and an attack could trigger a response. Adults know this pattern from life. Fear makes people jump to conclusions, and superpowers are no different. And that's why Russia's warning should not be seen as simple rhetoric. It's a reflection of a world where systems built to prevent nuclear war are crumbling. The treaties are gone. The communication hotlines are weak. The diplomacy is dead. The trust is shattered. And yet, both nations keep adding fuel to the fire. Some experts believe Russia's threat is strategic signaling designed to pressure the US into negotiations by invoking global fear. Others believe it as a prelude to something bigger, a long-term plan to reshape the nuclear balance in Russia's favor. And some fear the US refusal might push Moscow into dangerous testing or deployment patterns. But the truth is, no one knows which path is unfolding. Not diplomats, not analysts, not military strategists. The uncertainty itself is the threat, and as adults who carry the weight of responsibilities, families, financial pressures, and personal futures, the idea that world leaders are gambling with nuclear fire enough to unsettle even the strongest mind. Because nuclear war in just politics it's the end of everything built over generations. So now the question becomes, if this tension escalates further, what comes next? What happens if the US rejects Moscow again? What does growing nuclear threat actually look like in action, not words? Because the real danger might not be the warning we heard, but the actions we'll see next. But before we go deeper, ask yourself something uncomfortable. What if the moment we're living in right now is actually the quiet beginning of a new nuclear age, one that future generations will look back at and wonder why no one saw the warning signs clearly enough? Because Russia's message that the nuclear threat will grow isn't simply a political statement. It is a crack in the global safety net that adults and stable nations rely on to plan their futures, raise their families, invest in their dreams, and believe that tomorrow will be more predictable than yesterday. And the terrifying truth is this: once a nuclear arms race begins, it rarely stops until something irreversible happens. That fear, that gut-level anxiety adults feel when they hear world powers argue over control, power, and weapons is exactly why this moment matters more than most people realize. Right now, the United States and Russia stand at a crossroads. One path leads to dialogue, control, strategic stability, and a world where nuclear escalation is held back by agreements, communication, and mature diplomacy. The other path, the one we are dangerously drifting toward, leads to unchecked development, rapid modernization, and a world where nuclear weapons once again become central to global identity and national security. And history tells us that once superpowers commit to expansion, reversing that decision becomes almost impossible. Adults understand this better than anyone. Some decisions, once made, change everything. And both nations are inching closer to such a decision without even realizing how close they are to a point of no return. Russia's warning is not just about weapons, it's about pride, position, and power. Nations, like people, behave emotionally when they feel insecure or cornered, and Russia feels cornered. Pressured by sanctions, isolated by conflicts, surrounded by NATO forces, and burdened by the fear of American technological advantage, Moscow sees nuclear strength as its final, unshakable leverage. So, if the US refuses arms control talks, Russia may expand its arsenal, because that arsenal is the one thing Washington cannot ignore. For Russia, refusing to grow nuclear capability in the face of US rejection would feel like surrender, and superpowers do not surrender. Meanwhile, the United States views Russia's proposal with suspicion, seeing it not as a genuine attempt at stability, but as a maneuver to limit American power while Russia grows its own. Washington fears getting trapped in a cycle where Russia negotiates on paper but escalates in practice. So, the US chooses caution, distance, and pressure, believing that only a strong stance will force Russia into real, verifiable commitments. But here's the irony: the stronger the US stands, the more Russia feels compelled to escalate. And the more Russia escalates, the more the US pulls back. This feedback loop, this mutual fear, creates the perfect storm. Adults living through tense times know this pattern well. When communication breaks and misunderstandings grow, small disagreements turn into big conflicts. And with nuclear superpowers, even a small conflict can spiral into something the world may never recover from. Because nuclear tension is never just military tension, it's psychological tension. It affects global markets, national policies, alliances, military spending, and even the mental stability of nations. People don't talk about it openly, but nuclear fear quietly shapes how adults see the future, whether they feel safe, whether they believe their government can protect them, whether they trust tomorrow. This is why experts worry that rejecting Russia's proposal may trigger a sequence of escalations that no one can stop. Russia could test new long-range systems designed to bypass American defenses. The US might respond by accelerating hypersonic development or expanding deployment zones. NATO could increase readiness near Eastern Europe, prompting Russia to move strategic units closer to the border. And each side will call their actions defensive, even though every defensive action looks offensive to the other. Adults watching from the outside sense the tension, even if they don't know the technical details. They feel the world tightening like a pressure valve no one is willing to release. But here is the darkest possibility, the one no one wants to say out loud. If both nations keep pushing forward without talking, the next nuclear crisis might not start with a deliberate attack, but with a mistake, a misunderstood missile launch, a malfunctioning radar, a misinterpretation of military exercises. History has already shown us how close we came to disaster multiple times, saved only by the caution of leaders who understood the cost of miscalculation. But today, with trust gone and rhetoric rising, would leaders still hesitate long enough to verify? Or would they react instantly, driven by fear rather than clarity? Adults know that fear-driven decisions are the most dangerous kind, and right now, the world's nuclear future is being shaped by leaders who feel threatened, pressured, isolated, and suspicious. That combination is more dangerous than any warhead. So, what happens next? If the US continues rejecting Moscow's arms control proposal, Russia will almost certainly expand its strategic capabilities. We may see new missile deployments, new submarine patrol patterns, and new testing cycles aimed at demonstrating power. The US will counter with its own modernization, building weapons meant to exceed Russian capability. And the world will slowly enter a Cold War 2.0, shaped not by ideology, but by insecurity. A war of fear, not belief. A war of miscalculations, not missions. A war where nuclear arsenals grow, not because nations want to use them, but because they're terrified of falling behind. Adults everywhere will feel this shift not just through news cycles, but through rising costs of living, shifting political priorities, unstable markets, and the uneasy sense that global peace is no longer guaranteed. And the greatest tragedy is this: the world will move closer to catastrophe not because leaders wanted conflict, but because they believed escalation was the only way to avoid weakness. So the final question, the one that will define the next decade, is simple but terrifying. Will Russia and the United States pull back from the edge? Or will they push each other into a new era where nuclear threats grow louder, arsenals grow bigger, and stability becomes a memory instead of a reality? Because if both nations keep walking this path, the world may soon face consequences no generation has ever had to confront. And that is why staying informed matters. Understanding these shifts matters. Knowing the truth behind global power plays matters. Because the more adults understand what's really happening, the harder it becomes for world leaders to gamble with our future. If you want to stay ahead of these global power shifts, if you want the truth behind the threats, the strategies, the rivalry shaping your future, then make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Nation Face Off.